And today we're going to talk about the 8 levels of cooking that you just got to know. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different things and the different ways of cooking and kind of the optimal level. Of course, if we start at the top of food preparation, this is raw. And sometimes we can refer this to nature cooked. In other words, things that are prepared by nature are usually in their ultimate state of being. So, an apple is probably the fastest food on the planet, or an orange or a grape or things like that. They're in a great state in a raw situation. That's probably the optimal state for the maximum amount of vitamins, phytonutrients, and vitamins and minerals, these type of things. Enzymes are present in raw food. Okay? The next level that you're going to move to is steamed. Okay? So when you're doing steamed, and you can do levels of steaming, okay? So years ago, I used to have a little steamer, and some vegetables actually do a little bit better if they're lightly steamed. But what you don't want to do is steam them till they're totally done. A light steam, so just so they soften, makes them a little bit more digestible, and certain vegetables, they will become more bioavailable for you. Of course, things like rice and potatoes, or those starchy carbs, I really like to go with steaming as another great way to do that. Then we go to number 3, which is baked. So if you are cooking, and a lot of people that, especially a lot of meat eaters and stuff, if you're looking at the different ways to go, I think the third level of this is baked. Number 1, it helps for food preparation. I know a lot of people like to, especially back when I was contest dieting and all stuff like that, we used to bake up a lot of things and cook that pre-hand and then put them in storage containers. And food preparation, being prepared, is a very important aspect if you're going to be successful in your eating program, your nutrition program. So baked, not as good as steamed and not as good as raw, but still on the better side of things, okay? And then here's kind of the middle of the road right here. This is when we get into boiled. And that's, putting your vegetables or fruits or meats or whatever you're cooking into a pot, putting it with water and boiling it. Now, the only time that boiled might be okay is in certain types of soups where you're going to actually consume the broth. If you are boiling food, I do recommend that if it's a broth or something, that you drink the broth, because what happens is boiling oftentimes leaches essential minerals out of the fruits and vegetables, and people don't use the broth, and then they don't get the benefits. So that really sucks. So we go on to the next level. We go to number 5, okay, which is dried. Now, dried is an interesting level, and I'll tell you why. Because you can have some foods which are sun-dried. Okay, then you can have dehydrated. Okay, so a lot of raw foodies will dehydrate their food. Okay, so they'll do, there's low temperature, and then there's high temperature. Now, if you're going to dehydrate or dry your food, I think sun-dried is probably the best way to do it. I love sun-dried fruits. It become really amazing. Okay, that's kind of like slow or low temperature. Then you can do the low temperature, like dehydrated. That's another way to dry your foods. But then you get into high temperature things like, for example, you look at beef jerky, which is, essentially dried right out and completely burnt, or a lot of other things like, some of the dried fishes or things like that. This under high temperature, not so good for you. So if you're going to dry your foods, try and do it on low temperature. And also be sure, if you're eating dried foods, watch for chemical preservatives. Chemical preservatives are oftentimes put on these high temperatures. You'll see those dried fruits and vegetables inside of stores. Make sure that it's organic and it's pesticide, herbicide free, chemical free if you're selecting the dried foods. Next on our list is going to be number 6. Okay, this is where so basically, if we look here, this is the ideal. These would probably be the ideal ones right up here. This would be kind of like okay. This would be we'll call this the depends section, depending on how you do it, can determine. But now we're going to get into the not so good. Let's call it that. I won't condemn anybody for anything, but bottom line, let's get into not so good. This is fried. Whoops, forgot my eye. Fried foods. Fried foods contain a lot of trans fatty acids, which I see at some point they're going to ban those eventually. Trans fatty acids don't digest very well. They have a whole host of associated conditions: heart disease, obesity, oxidative damage. You really want to avoid fried foods as much as you possibly can, okay? And then, if you can't get away from fried foods, make it a once a week thing, okay? You know what? Once a week, you have your whatever day, do that. Okay, I'm going to have my fried thing. The more that you move towards this, the less appealing these foods. So keep in mind, if you're used to fried, why don't you move up the ladder and try some baked stuff? And that was a thing, years and years ago when I was a meat eater. I used to love fried chicken when I was a kid. And when I got into bodybuilding, I realized, well, I can't have fried chicken. It's too fattening. So I moved to baked, and I created creative ways to make my baked foods better. And that was a great thing. And then eventually I moved from baked, I went to steamed. And then ultimately I went to a completely raw food diet. I did that for a few years, and I eat still mostly raw today. But remember, you want to move up the chain. That's the idea here. Next, nuked. Okay? And this is a word for microwaves. Now, there is an incredible amount of research on microwaves. Basically, when you microwave your food, whether it's microwaving a coffee or microwaving a meal, you actually restructure the DNA of that food. You completely change the food. So what happens by nuking it, you make it so it's unrecognizable by the body. Whatever it is, no matter how good it is, you've ruined it. There's no value to this at all. Okay? Zero, and probably a health detriment. And the final stage, okay, this one is burned. We talked about that a little bit before in one of the earlier lessons. Burned. Anything that's charred, when you get those burn marks, grilled or really overcooked, this is where you end up in real problems. The health associations with burnt food are atrocious. The oxidative damage that goes inside your body. You do not want this. These two, in my opinion, avoid at all costs. Okay? Dried, remember, we've got the things, certain areas it's okay, certain things that it's not okay. So remember your different routes. Then we got boiled and baked. Boiled's kind of in the middle. It's okay for like soup and stews and those type of things. But, if you can avoid boiling it, move up here to better to go to steamed. And then we can just move up the list. So if you're eating a lot of fried foods, let's try and move up the list. And ultimately, we'd like to have probably 80% in the 80% of your food in a raw state. Natural, nature cooked. It's full of your vitamins, phytonutrients, and vegetables. Increased in vitality. Now, the further you are down the list, you definitely want to offset it. Every time before you eat, you want to make sure that you take your enzymes. Okay? The reason being is this allows you to absorb and utilize, even if it's been cooked. Or lots of times raw food has lost a lot of the enzymes in it too, because you don't know how long it's been sitting, and your body has to use its own enzymes to digest it. Always enzymes before any forms of these cooking, because this is what converts it into utilizable units. So I hope you got this. There's the 8 levels, okay? Raw, steamed, baked, broiled, dried, fried, nuked, and burned. So they become self-explanatory, but I hope that's a little idea for you. Take a look at what you're eating over the week. Record your journal and say, well, how much of these are I doing? And what you want to do is just start replacing these bottom ones with things up here. That's going to make an improvement. And as you move up the list, it's just going to become easier and easier. And as you get more biologically optimized, as you fulfill this program and go through it, you're going to find that this is just the natural way you do. It just becomes easier and easier and easier, because what you do is you activate your innate animal wisdom inside you. So I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. I hope this was a little idea for you to try and move up that chart, and we'll see you on the next lesson.